welcome to Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. And today, I thought I'd break out an oldie but a goodie. The Beastlord, a game of wizardry and warfare from Yaquinto Games. So I've got this back in the 80s when I believe I was in junior high. Might have been in high school when I got this, but this truly is a fantasy war game. This is a war game with a fantasy theme. And so let's crank in the box and see what we got here. You can see a little bit of dishing in the box. As I said, I've had this from the 80s, and so it's in relatively good condition, considering all things considered, I should say. You get the rule book, and Yaquinto was known for its, this is 1979 publication here, at least that's the copyright. Revised edition, 1980 on there. But Yaquinto was known for these kind of landscape rule books. They weren't quite 8.5 by 11 page, a little bit smaller, but they kind of did these long rule books here. And very standard, the chapter system or paragraph system, somewhat complex. When I was getting into war games, these were a little bit of a challenge to get into because they were very dense, as you can see here. Here's your table of contents. Up to page 32 is the credits, but I mean, that's relatively dense there. And the text here, this is just the introduction. But it's triple column, black and white, which was standard for them back in the day here. You had representations of the counters, and the counters were very much a creature of the late 70s, early 80s. But at least for the fantasy ones, they had some design on there, some differences between, your different warriors and archers and heroes, and each of the different factions had their own icons for each one of those things. But then you get into the rules here, and as you can see here, it's triple column in small print and very dense rules as far as explaining the game. And this very much is, a war game, and had a very unique aspect, and we'll get to this when we get to the map, but it had a strategic map, which looked, evoked the fantasy notions of what you would expect from a fantasy map and a fantasy world. And I played Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, so the map felt like this came right out of a Dungeons and Dragons fantasy world. And then they had a tactical map, which was very much from the war game world. It had different, depending on what terrain you were fighting in, you could pick portions of the tactical map, and it had some of the predominant terrain features of whatever terrain you were in. So if you're like in forest, then it had more forest, or the mountains, more mountains. But there was this tactical map that you actually fought the battles on. So you kind of moved on the strategic map and did strategic type things, and then you went to the tactical map to do battle. And that was also reminiscent of a game that I played from Avalon Hill. I don't know if it originally was from Avalon Hill, but it was called Titan, and I have the later version that came from, I think, Valley Games, or somebody republished it later. That's the version I got. But I remember playing the Avalon Hill version of it that had kind of that same notion. You had a strategic map that was very abstract, and then when you went to battle, you had these tactical maps that were very, very small. So as you can see here on the rules, very war gamey. There's my technical term for you on that. But it had rules that covered combat, of course, but also covered magic and spells and resources and villages and everything that you wouldn't find on the strategic map is going to be covered in here as well. Here's sieges, here's combat spells, and so there's a whole section. This 210 is all magic here. And you had spell points, and then different counters had, like, I think magic qualifications on them. And here's some of your different spells over here. So, fast, slow, halt, lost, part water, invisibility, all-seeing eye, cloak storm. And then you have those are the movement spells. Then you had combat magic spells. So as I said, it really did incorporate, a traditional war game. It incorporated the magic and fantasy elements into a traditional war game. I guess what I'm trying to say. Here's the Great Dragon. Here's the Great Sword. So you had some artifacts, and each of the different factions had some, I think, primary artifacts that they dealt with. Withdrawal from combat, plunder and destruction of habitations. There was this kind of things that went on the strategic board as the effects of your campaigns. But as you can see here, a lot of different rules here. And again, from a standard war game, not that much. But when you're trying to pick it up from a fantasy aspect, this is very war gamey, right? Stacking, your sequence of play, and then you got to the tactical game rules here. A lot of different charts kind of buried in here, and they're on these. I think some of these are on the board possibly, but on some player aids. Yaquinto was not the best player aids. It was kind of stark, some of the player aids that they had. And so there's some examples of maybe like a range attack or maybe a cone attack from a dragon or something like that. So there's the rules. Then you had these holding charts here, and this is where you kept track of your different factions. You would have like these holding boxes, and so you didn't want to get stuff too cluttered on the board. And then here's like castles. So if you had different castles, or some of the factions had lairs, other factions had hamlets. I think like the human factions had like hamlets, and the goblins or whatever might have lairs or towns or nests and stuff like that. Then you had your spell point total down here and turn record. So not too elaborate. There were several of these for the different factions. As you can see here, not very exciting, I should say. Or colorful for that matter. So you had several of these for the different factions. Then you had the here's some of the charts here. These are this is, I think, giving you some of the capabilities for some of the different charts. Like here's the unit counters for men's, elves, goblins, lord here, and some of the different bonuses. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure how these charts work, but there's different modifications on here. It's been a while since I've pulled this out, but you got some that's a one player aid. Here's your screens. Wow, look at that. That is a screen. So like if you want to, when you want to keep stuff hidden or hidden information, that's your screen. And you might actually use that when you set up on like the tactical board too, I believe. But you had, screen for each faction, and I mean, nowadays, especially in like Euro games or hobby games, I mean, the screens are very elaborate. They'd have all the information you need on it. They'd have, graphics and color on each side, but that is the screen for from old Yaquinto days. There's two maps here, and we'll get to that. Then you got the counters. And these have been jumbled up several times. I don't really have these sorted probably to any rhyme or reason, because this is in several moves, these get jumbled up because the old Yaquinto tray counters didn't have a cover to it. So the minute you move these or jostle these, stuff goes everywhere. But these are the original dice. So, I mean, thick dice there. But you can see the counters here, so at least there's some representation. I mean, it's not super fancy, but you just get numbers and then whatever the graphic representation of what that unit is on there. You had elves, humans, goblins, and I think there was like the beast faction or the Beastlord faction, which I believe is the red here. So this is the counter trade. Let's get to the maps, because the maps are somewhat interesting here. Let's look at the strategic map first, because that's the one that is most akin to, let's get this stuff out of the way over here. As you can see here, I'll pull up a little bit. So you've got, this is the strategic map. And so you've got on this side over here, this is basically, I believe this is the elves here, faction. So you've got a representation of the different units that are in there, their names. Like here's the Lord, the Princess, the Standard, Town, Magic Loot, Hero, Warrior, Archer, Royal Family, Wizard, so on. Here you have your magic track to keep track of points. I think these are the different spells, and that's their point cost. This is your board movement spells, combat spells, train effects, movement costs, withdraw from combat. Here's your combat results table over here. So all your stuff that you're going to use most of the time are right here, and then you got your destroyed and captured box. Really small print there. On this side here is the I think there's like the goblins or what have you, like because you have a chieftain, hero, hobgoblin, warrior, archer, and the like. Of course, it has all its spell tracks and combat chart. Then you have these are, I think these are the humans, the Lord, hero, knight, sergeant, men-at-arms, what have you there. And then there's the Beastlord faction. There's the Beastlord himself, Hill Troll, Basilisk, Captain, Wolves, Wolverine, Wyvern, however you want to say, Ogre, Lizard, Centipede, and the like there. So that's are the different factions, and you can see from the board here, you've got your mountains here, you've got forests, and it's nice looking. Let's pull that up here a little bit so you can see some of the forests. I mean, it's nice graphics there. As I said, it's very much, it looked like some of the maps that from some of the books I had on like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff like that. It just, very reminiscent of that. And this is the strategic map, and moving around the strategic map. And this is where, you put your cities or your hamlets or your lairs and stuff like that, and keep track of what happens on the strategic map. And then when there is a battle, you would go to the tactical map. And again, the tactical map is kind of divided into areas. You have these little stars here, which are kind of like the center. So like if you're fighting in the mountains, you're probably going to center this on this map and do the fights here where there are more mountains. In the forest, you're probably going to center on this area or this map. If it's more plains, it's going to be here. I don't know if this is like just hills or what have you, or if this is like swamp, but that's kind of how the tactical map worked. And so you would take your units from the strategic map that are actually fighting, and then you would actually maneuver and do tactical combat here. So I found that interesting. Kind of having your strategic, is one of the earlier games that I played that had that notion of a strategic or operational map. And then when you got into battle, you got into it on the tactical map. So so that's Beastlord. That is what I wanted to share today. Love to know your thoughts on this one. If you played it back in the day, if you still have it and still play it, or does it just gather dust, or is it sitting on a shelf somewhere, never to have any love. But love to hear your thoughts on it. As I said, I found it I found a lot of the Yaquinto games to be a little tough to get into at first. They were just a little different enough than the Avalon Hill games that I played predominantly. I didn't get into SPI stuff until later. And I think the Yaquinto people came from Battle Line, I think. I don't know all the history of that, but I think Battle Line went away or sold off, and then some of those people went to Yaquinto, and then some of the Yaquinto people ended up other places when Yaquinto went away I think it was in the early to mid 80s, I think, is when Yaquinto eventually went away. But like S. Craig Taylor, who has been on a lot of different designs and has done some pretty amazing games, he was one of the, I think, drivers of Yaquinto back in the day, and I think he came from Badline. But again, I don't know all the history of that. Check out those that know, like Gary from Ardworth Flair. He might be somebody that knows a little bit more on that kind of stuff. But I cut my teeth with Avalon Hill, and then I immediately moved into Yaquinto. Was some of the I got into some of those games. One reason, because Yaquinto had a lot of variety. They just didn't do war games. They did, some fantasy and sci-fi, and they also did some, kind of hobby games, or what are now kind of called Euro games. They did some of that as well, which, so did Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill branched out beyond war games and got into sports games and family type games as well. So that's one reason probably why I went to Yaquinto, because of the variety that they offered. But this was one I got early, and it took me a long time to get to the table, because it was kind of chunky for me to get to, and just the way the rules were laid out, and I don't know, for some reason I just had a mental block on this one for a while. But I eventually got it and played it, and I thought it was good. I just didn't play it as much, because by the time I finally got it to the table, I was busy getting ready to go to college and do some other stuff, and there were other games that I could get into. Like I just said, Titan is much more abstract than this, but and a lot longer than this, unfortunately. But I enjoyed playing that a little bit better. I thought it was easier to get to and easier access as far as understanding the rules than this was. And there was other games out there. I looked at Magic Realm once, and that was the other big fantasy game of the day, and boy, that was just a beast. I had a friend who had that. In fact, I had a friend who had Magic Realm and a friend who had Titan, and I brokered a trade between the two, and neither one of them played those two games, and I probably should have grabbed them from them, but I didn't. And I eventually did get Titan later on, but Magic Realm I just didn't have the interest in. That I'd rather just play, just break out some role-playing games or role-playing books than to probably dive into that one. So this wasn't as crunchy as that one, but just wasn't as easy to get into. And then I might do some more in this series of on my Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturdays, and going into some other fantasy war games that I've collected over the years that I think are easier to get into, simpler rule set, but lets you get right to the action than this one probably does. And so that's why this one collects a lot more dust on my shelf than some of the other ones that I've picked up over the time. But this is somewhat of an underrepresented element. Your tried and true fantasy war games, especially on that has a strategic scale and with the ability to go tactical. Not a lot out there on that. So it's interesting that this was an early one and has not really been repeated or duplicated very much. Anyway, that's my thoughts for today. Love to know what you guys think about any of that. Thanks for spending some time with me on Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. Hope you're having a great rest of your day. I know I'm going to try to. I got a long road trip. Get my son back today from Boise State, and then we take him right down to, got like a 9-hour drive to get him down to the next summer school camp that he has, a college camp that he has this summer. He's got two more to go, and then a third one he just got picked for at another school. So anyway, I thought I'd get this out, get some sleep, and then get on the road. Hey, you all have a good one, and thanks so much for spending some time. Thanks for watching.